average person who has a chronic illness like I had with the acute symptoms of chronic fatigue syndrome that I developed would need a completely different structure of society in which to approach their healing for them to be successful. And I started imagining what that would look like. At first I said, well, it kind of reminds me of like a alcohol and drug abuse rehab where a person goes into a facility and they get a slew of different services that help their body, soul, spirit. It also provides a controlled environment where they can't access contaminants to their body. It establishes a culture of healing where they're much more likely to be open and honest and vulnerable in a safe space, etc. Then I thought rehab centers, they are crisis interventions, but they do not ensure sobriety. They can help kickstart sobriety, but the average person that goes in there doesn't come out sober for the rest of their life. They usually go through several rounds of relapse before they get sober, if they get sober at all. And then I also thought, well, that means that somebody with a chronic illness would have to stay in a facility like that for many months, if not many years. And then I thought, well, who would want to do that? That would feel like a prison sentence, right? It would need to be more of a community, like a village, where they would have to move there, establish a life there, have some normalcy in their life, but then spend some portion of their life focusing on their healing. Like I did when I was most sick. I considered it my 20-hour-a-week job to attend activities that promoted my healing, that supported my body, soul, and spirit. And they were for anything from going on a prayer walk for an hour to attending a church service to having coffee with a friend, decaf coffee because caffeine is bad for me, to doing a project at home on my own, to journaling, and then on top of that, going to doctors and therapists and group sessions and sponsor meetings and whatnot. So 20 hours a week for me was a significant amount of effort. And a lot of that was done from the couch because I couldn't get off the couch, especially at the beginning. But then later I was able to do more and more outside the house. So I thought they would have to have some sort of normalcy in their life, but then we would have to reduce the burdens of transportation, of bills. They would have to be able to either have jobs where they could work only part-time, only around their doctor and therapist schedules. So they would need some sort of hyper-flexible schedule. They would need jobs that required either less physical strength or less mental acuity, or of varying levels, where maybe they had to produce a monthly project, but they only had to work on it on days where they were having good days and they didn't have to work on it daily according to a certain schedule. And I thought that would mean that that community would have to have a lot of healthy people in it, because one of the things that tanks rehab centers or villages where you gather a lot of people who are hurting the same way together is that they actually are like crabs and they tear each other down. They pull down people who are trying to rise up and get out of the cage, and then they just pull them back down because they're all struggling with very similar paradigms. So you'd have to have a certain percentage of people be healthy people who actually knew how to interact with chronically ill people in a compassionate way, but also an empowering way, who didn't provide toxic charity, which makes hurting people dependent on other people, but actually provide empowering charity that helps hurting people heal and then mature so that they can turn around and help other hurting people heal and then mature. And then I thought, well, those other people who are there, that might be expensive just to pay someone to live in your community. Then that would end up being like a huge nonprofit with a really big fundraising goal every year. And that's exhausting. And in years that people are feeling less generous, that could drastically affect how many people we could help. So I thought to be viable, it would have to be economically self-sustaining and economically profitable enough for continued improvement. So that meant that the village itself wouldn't just be a rehab village that's funded by external donations, but it would have to itself provide services that people paid for either from within or from outside, where people outside the village paid for services for people who live in the village. And then I thought the culture of the village and the lifestyle of the village would also have to promote healing by reducing toxin load and promoting a more outdoor lifestyle, reducing the sedentary and the car-based lifestyle, promoting a lot more walking, a lot more social engagement. community activities. It would have to change the food supply, be a lot more sustainable in terms of bringing healthy food in or creating healthy food from within, where we knew what was going into the food and therefore what was going into the bodies of the hurting people who need the purest and most nutritious food they can access. And part of that economic viability would also mean that we would need to develop housing and food systems that were cheap. That would then reduce the economic pressures on hurting people. Because when you have a chronic illness and you're working 40 hours a week or 60 hours a week, you don't have time or energy to heal yourself because all of your time and energy is spent doing work for someone else. But healing is a job. It's like parenting is a job. A person can be a parent full time and still not accomplish everything that they want to accomplish. You can say the same thing for healing. So to reduce the number of hours that people would have to work, you'd have to reduce the cost of living for them without reducing the quality of life. And how can you do that? Well, perhaps you could do alternate housing approaches like container homes or mobile homes, or teach people how to build and live off of food forests. So it's agriculture that has very low maintenance requirements because the permaculture is a balanced system where the trees feed the brushes and the brushes feed the plants and the plants feed the trees, and it's the circle. And you have chickens and rabbits, goats and pigs, and they all interact with the ecosystem. And then you can also harvest the small animals. It's not as burdensome as raising big animals. Like anything larger than a goat takes some really expensive housing, veterinary care, a lot of food, but anything smaller than a goat, you can just give food scraps and or allow them to graze in a food forest, and that's usually enough. Then I thought other ways to reduce the economic pressures on people with chronic illness so that they have more time and energy and money to pursue their healing professionally would be to capture energy and have a self-sustaining energy grid, solar, wind, water, do a per house system or a per village system, and even sell overage to the local grid. And that can be an economic resource. As I started thinking through all those things, I thought, well, what's probably most ideal model is that every person lives on a plot, and a plot should probably be able to support up to 10 people in a family, and probably a multi-generational family. So at least 2, if not 3 generations all living in a plot. And those families can be friends like family, or they can be actual blood and marriage relatives. It doesn't really matter, but what we do know matters is the multi-generational social structures that support people in their healing. To support 10 people, you would probably need about 30 acres for the plot to be self-sustaining just for that family, so that if everything else goes down, that family can still live and eat and have energy and water capturing and some basic sewage treatment on that plot. And then you probably would need to put about 10 plots together to form a village. And then that village would have a community center and some community activities and some basic services, maybe a market, maybe a mechanic, maybe a computer repair person, maybe a veterinary person, maybe a healthcare provider, maybe a therapist, all servicing that village and potentially also living in that village. And then promoting community activities, because we know that communities break people and communities heal people. And there is no hurting without broken relationship, and there's no healing without healthy relationship. But then there are probably services and experiences that you can't provide in an economically viable way within a village like that. So you could probably group multiple villages, and then where they're centered around some sort of city that has much bigger, more expensive, more complex systems like a health and wellness center, retreats, education, etc. Dreams started getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and not least because of the impact of my husband, who's just a big thinker. When I first met him, my idea was having a small village, which is essentially like a rehab center, but micro community style. And after a couple of years of being married to him, it grew to like, let's build a healing city with multiple villages and multiple plots per village, and then we can plant them all over the world. As we continued to think about how would this be economically viable, we said once we planted a plot, we would have to be able to sell that plot in a way that's financially affordable to them, but also provide some profit to us, because we know that in a capitalistic society, you need to have 10 to 20% retained earnings in order to continuously grow and improve. And if you ain't growing, you're dying. There is no standing still. So putting in that profit margin would be important for us as a company to continue to pursue the dreams that we have for impacting the world. We'd eventually sell all 10 plots to the village, including the businesses within it, to the people who operate those businesses, and that would set us free to then go and plant the next village. That way, we're not incurring this burden and creating this dependency on us as a company. But instead, we are just helping stand up these complex relationships and these cultures to hand them over to the people who will most directly benefit from them, who can then take them and grow them into what they need them to be. Now we're much more of planters, sustainable urban planters, who then sell these villages and cities to the employees who live in them and who run them, and then we just move on. And having an exit strategy is a really important part of any organizational venture, whether it's a business, whether it's a ministry, whether it's a nonprofit. If it depends on you, it's going to be limited by you. But if you go in with an exit strategy, then you give permission for the organization to have a vision beyond you, and therefore to continue to grow wherever the winds take it. Thus came our dream of planting healing communities that will ultimately become employee-owned and resident-owned healing communities. And we can then spread the influence of said communities, spread the concepts of how we design communities, invite others to design communities that make sense for them, and promote a different way of life that has at its core improving the welfare of its residents in a healing and maturing kind of way. One day we will buy a piece of land that we can build our own family plot on to demonstrate the viability of the self-sustaining, low effort, small animal husbandry, agroforestry model, with an additional agritourism element to it, where people can bring their RVs and or Airbnbs and or a hotel to then come and experience what we are doing in the plot, and then take that idea back with them and apply it however they want in their own spheres. Once we use that to do some education and also some investment fundraising, then we can get enough land to do the village model. Just a little dream. So if you know anyone who's interested in investing in planting intentional communities in a profitable manner in order to improve public health in America, reach out to me at our website. I'd love to hear your comments, what your big dream might be based on the battles that you have fought and won in your past. Thanks for listening. See you next time. Bye.